Welcome to this week's snowy edition of Mob Talk. I'm Dave Stratweiser.
And I'm George Anastasia with the Philadelphia Inquirer.
George, this week the fallout from the big mob bust in New York and some fallout for a South Philly wise guy in trouble with the law again.
Yeah, men of honor no more and omerta no more.
All right, George, we got the heavy coats on today because we got some bad weather, but lots of fallout from last week's big mob bust in New York, 127 wise guys and associates. What are you hearing from mob watchers?
Well, I mean, I think what we're seeing is, and we're waiting to see more of this, there's a lot of wiretaps, a lot of secret conversations. That's going to lay bare all of these charges. And one of the things I'm hearing interesting, I was talking to a source up in North Jersey, nobody seems to be anxious to fill this vacuum. I think wise guys are cognizant of the fact that you're at the top of the heap, you're a target, and you're going away. And this is happening again and again, and that might be one of the fallouts from what we're seeing here.
We talked about this last week. This is the fourth big mob takedown in the last 2 years. Somewhere around 220 to 250 wise guys taken out. What you're telling me is you're hearing there's no great rush by anybody to take their position.
Exactly, because I think when you take the top spot, then you become the target of the investigation. And these guys maybe are starting to realize it's better to stay in the shadows, make your own money doing your own thing, but you don't want a leadership role. And the individual I talked to said he's been amazed that usually when this kind of thing happens, you hear all kind of rumors, so-and-so wants to move up, so-and-so wants to do this. Not hearing any of that right now because they're a little bit leery about you take the top spot, where you're going to go, you're going to end up in jail.
And that usually stirs the pot and gives you a little turmoil, right, within the ranks.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that happens here. We're talking about the 5 New York families, New Jersey, and the Patriarcha family in New England. All have taken a hit in this. 30 made guys, 127 guys total. Lots of secret conversations and lots of informants. Wise guys and associates who have turned and have become informants and are going to be up on that witness stand. So there's a lot of problems on a lot of different levels.
You mentioned omerta at the beginning. That's dead, it seems to me, at this point.
The code of silence, you know, omerta, to be a man, that's what the mob always lived for. I mean, you know, nobody gave anybody up. That's been going by the boards. You know, we've seen it here in Philadelphia. Omerta in Philadelphia is kind of like the Liberty Bell cracked. It doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, we're like the poster child for that, right?
And we're seeing it again and again across the board. New York, most of those families have been hit with the same kind of thing, and I think this is another example of that.
All right, let's move the New York situation down to Philadelphia for a minute. If we do get a mob indictment here and they take out the hierarchy of the mob here, do you think there'll be a rush to fill those vacancies?
Well, you know, I mean, each hit that happens in Philadelphia, of course the family's not as large, it diminishes the number of guys out there. So now we're talking about 20, 25 guys. You take another big hit where 10, 15 guys are taken off. What do you got left? You got some guys coming out of jail. They've done time already. They want to get back into the game. If they want to get back into the game. The history in Philadelphia, if you look at it, mob boss in Philadelphia from Angelo Bruno in the 1980s to the present, you end up dead or in jail. That's what happens.
Yeah, and now Joe Legambi, who's the alleged head of the mob here in Philadelphia, he's had a nice little 10-year run, so he's been pretty stable for 10 years. But this could be a quick in-and-out situation here.
I mean, Legambi's had the longest tenure since Bruno, and he stayed in the shadows, basically, and run an organization. But if he goes down in an indictment, I think we're going to see disorganized, organized crime in the mob, which we haven't seen. We've seen it in other organizations, but we haven't seen it in the traditional Philadelphia mob. I don't know that anybody's going to want to jump up and say, let me be the boss.
Yeah, and an example of that may be the fact that jail mob boss Joey Merlino, who's about to get out of jail, is headed to Florida, the Southern District, not coming here. Probably hesitant to get back involved, at least at this point.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, and from a personal perspective, that's probably the smart move for Joey. If Joey comes back here, he's always going to be the target of law enforcement. And if Joey comes back here, it's just in his nature, he's going to get involved. You know that. I mean, he has that charisma, he has that leadership. Guys are going to want to be around him. He's better off going to Florida. If he goes to Florida, and if there's a major indictment here, I mean, what do we got left out on the streets? Not a lot.
Not much. George, let's talk about a little fallout this week. Mob underboss Marty Angelina apparently arrested again on the 17th of January here, having some problems.
Yeah, the allegation is it's a domestic dispute between him and a girlfriend and some violence. I mean, and this goes to kind of what we were talking about earlier, the men of honor. You know, you don't do this kind of stuff. I mean, this guy's supposedly the underboss, the number 2 guy in his family. He was arrested for spitting on a cop down in Margate, and that grew out of an altercation with a girlfriend. This is another incident where the allegation is he and the girlfriend got into it. Some neighbors called the police. It's not the way a mobster, a mafia member, is supposed to conduct himself. And this kind of thing kind of flies in the face of what we've talked about in the past, but it is, I think, very indicative of where we are today within this organization.
All right, let's take a look. There's a mugshot here that is horrendous. who got the worst of this, to tell you the truth?
Well, it makes you wonder, and again, it's a personal issue. We don't like to get into this stuff because it's not related to the mob. But given the fact that he's a high-profile guy, he's the underboss, you look at this kind of thing and you say, is that the picture of organized crime in Philadelphia? Is that the honored society that the Mafia pretends to be? I don't think so.
All right, and we're also talking about, because Marty Angelina has a history here, since he got out of jail for his big stint on the racketeering case, he had to go back to jail because he was hanging around with wise guys twice.
Right.
And now he's had a couple of arrests here, including the spitting on a police officer in Margate.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the kind of comportment, if you will, that the alleged mob boss Joe Legambi wants. Stay in the shadows, don't call attention to yourself. You do this kind of thing, you get into headlines, you get your picture in a paper like this. That's not the way these guys are supposed to operate, and that's certainly not the way Legambi wants his organization to conduct itself. But in Angelina's case, it's happened again and again and again.
All right, George, next week we're going to get into wise guys, former wise guys, and associates and former associates getting into legitimate business. Yeah,
what's that about? Is it a chance to start over and do something in the real world, in the legitimate world, or is it a way to hide money?
Okay, that's it for Mob Talk this week.